Here is the second model in my LEGO Technic Drivetrain model series. This one models a Porsche 911 drivetrain with the 7+ reverse dual clutch sequential gearbox. So I've always been inspired by the dual clutch gearbox that Shippo used in his Porsche 911, how it used 2 friction clutches with an additional motor for actually applying the clutch force. So that's what I've tried to do here. It's probably not the most realistic, and it's not the easiest, not even close. It's very hard to make, but it was cool, and I'm glad to have been able to do this thing that I've always wanted to do. So you can see we've got the flat 6 engine back here at a large scale, and we have a large gearbox here. You can see the top clutches there, and there's more on the bottom. Can't really see there. And then the differential here, this is the output. Then we've just got a stand that it sits on with the controls. If you look under here, you can see we've got 4 motors, 4 power function switches, and a rechargeable battery. So I can turn on the battery with this button here, and then demonstrate the differential lock, which is the simplest function. On and off, on, off. It's controlled by this lever, and a power functions media motor up here, runs some universal joints down to here, then rotates those bevel gears, then goes through this linear clutch up to that part there to actually lock it. So that's a very simple mechanism. Doesn't really add to the complexity a whole lot, but it is there on the real car, and I thought it was nice to include. So if I flip this lever, the drive starts up, and runs the engine here, which has the realistic boxer type, where they both go out and in together, unlike the way they normally do in LEGO. And then because of the large scale, I was also able to just offset them at 60 or 120 degree angles. I don't think it's quite the accurate pattern, but it's more accurate than it would have been otherwise. See the differential moving there, which would be connected to the wheels. Drive is controlled by this L motor here, through these bevel gears, by this switch, then runs up to these bevel gears to run the engine and the transmission. The gearbox is definitely the most complicated part of the model, though. So the drive comes in down there, and if you can see right in there, there's a couple 14-tooth gears right in the center. That's on the drive axle. And then it drives a blue 20-tooth clutch gear there, and then a 12-tooth gear at the top. So then, because the 14 and the 12-tooth gears have slightly different numbers of teeth, it causes the 2 clutches connected those to run at slightly different speeds. So that there, and that there, the 2 input halves of the clutches. So then, I'll get more to the way the clutches work later, but then, when engaged, they run these other halves of the clutches, connected to these 28-tooth gears. So this one runs 28 to 24, and then runs this gearbox, the odd speeds over here, which are slightly faster than the other ones. And then on this side, the 28-tooth gear also runs the 24-tooth gear to run the even and reverse gearbox over here, slightly slower. So within the gearbox, the input is the 24-tooth gear. So down here we've got the side where we can engage these gears to the gray gear right there at a 1-to-1 ratio, or at the other end we can engage the blue to the black at a 5-to-3 ratio. So those are the fast and slow options in here. Then the output down here, we've got a 16-tooth gear meshed to a 12-tooth gear at a odd spacing, then down to a 20-tooth gear. So that makes for a minor difference in speeds between that gear and this one. Right, if this one is engaged, it runs that down to the bottom, so it's slightly slower, whereas this one here just goes straight out as a direct drive. So then it comes out to this 8-tooth gear right there, which then runs the red 16-tooth to run this black 12-tooth right in the middle, which also connects to the other side of the gearbox. and then drives the differential. So it's quite a complicated gearing with some unusual spacing and overall very tight ratios. A typical gearbox, like a 4-speed, usually has 1:1, 3:5, or 1:3, and then 1:5, which are pretty large spacings. Then if you have those spacings, you get approximately a kind of like a 16:20 type of difference. And then if you have that even further, you more or less get kind of my 12:14 difference that's right at the middle of everything. So it's a very tight spacing. The overall ratios have a somewhat smaller spread than the real car, but other gearbox designs, like a more common Lego one, would have been a much wider spread of gears. So I think this is fairly realistic and made for a compact build. The clutches are they're pushed by these black L-beams connected to these tan axles. So when the tan axle is pushed, it pushes the clutch in to engage it. So those are pushed by 2 long beams here. So there's this one for that clutch, and then there's another one in there for the other clutch. And then those work by being pressed against by these black wedge-built wheels right there. So this axle here actually rotates that whole assembly in to push the clutches using that wheel, and then when the gearbox runs with the motor, it slides this back and forth, so then for every half rotation, it switches which clutch is engaged. So that one's in, now that one's in. So bottom, top. And the other side, you can see it moving a little bit there, the tan axle. But anyways, I guess a half rotation here brings it to the other side. But then we've got gearing of 12 to 24, 12 to 24, and then to these wave selectors. So it's actually 4 times slower there. So for a full rotation, like out of that clutch and then back in, we rotate a quarter rotation or 1 gear down here. So it cycles correctly. Reverse, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh. So this one is run by a motor that attaches onto here to just run all the shifting. And the clutches are controlled from this axle here, which runs down. Clutch moving here, or going here, in and out, pressing against that beam and engaging the clutch. So if I start up the motors, I can see the differential is, well, it's kind of turning it intermittently with the motor still rubbing a little. But if I engage the clutch, oops, come on again. There. Oh, stop. You'll see it just runs the whole time. And if I let it out again, it is going back to intermittent because the clutch isn't in all the way. And it wouldn't run if I put friction on it. So here from a different angle you can see the clutch motor moving in and out. So on Sheepo's Porsche that I was inspired by, this same motor also ran the disc brakes. Originally I'd thought about adding suspension to mine and having brakes and doing that, but when I calculated the overhang the car would have to form a scale, it was going to be like 1 to 2 point something scale, which is an insanely large scale. It would have been, the whole total car would probably have been wider than this dresser, and that just seemed like an awful lot of work. And I don't know how you make a suspension that big out of Lego. I've never tried, so I just left it at this. So to shift the gearbox, you can see right now we're in reverse, and on that side, so I'm going to start upshifting and kind of count off the gears, I guess. So, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, no, not eighth, back to reverse. I just kept counting. Reverse through seventh, and then reverse again. finally, so the shifting is done by this L motor here through a worm gear, and the clutch is done through, I think, this medium motor here, also through a worm gear. So overall, the model didn't really perform as smoothly as I would have hoped. The clutches didn't seem to engage and disengage. Like, the difference was pretty small, so when it was disengaged, it would still rub. But when it was engaged, it would still sometimes slip, which was an issue. Made it less enjoyable to operate. But I'm still happy to have gotten the whole logic of the transmission working and in a relatively small space. Lots of fun to build a large engine like that for the first time. So, this was an enjoyable drivetrain model to make, I think. And introduced some new techniques, like the whole clutch mechanism here, where it goes back and forth between the two. I really didn't know how I would do that until I started, but got it figured out, more or less.